Hello there and good morning. My name's Don Arleth and you're watching World News coming live to you from Warsaw. Ukraine's High Anti-Corruption Court has ordered Energoatom security chief Ihor Fursenko to be held in preventive custody until January 8th, 2026, while bail is set at $2.2 million. Investigators allege Fursenko was involved in laundering money while acting as a back office accountant in a major energy sector corruption case.
The court decided to apply to the suspect, Ihor Leonidovich Fursenko, born on February the 16th, 1969, a preventive measure in the form of detention for a period of 60 days from the date of arrest, that is, until January the 8th, 2026. The bail for the suspect is set at $2.2 million. Bail may be posted by the suspect himself or by another natural or legal person into the account of the High Anti-Corruption Court.
And President Zelenskyy vowed to overhaul the national nuclear energy operator Energoatom after the major anti-corruption probe hit Ukraine's energy sector. In his nighttime address, he demanded full transparency, and he also pledged his administration's full support for investigators.
Today I had a detailed conversation with the Prime Minister of Ukraine, Yulia Sviridenko. First off, there must be absolute transparency in the energy sector, without exception. I fully support every investigation by law enforcement and anti-corruption agencies. This is a clear and consistent position for everyone. No schemes. It is good that the Cabinet of Ministers of Ukraine will provide full assistance to the investigation and all judicial efforts. There will be a cleanup and reboot of the management of Energoatom.
EU finance ministers meet today to decide how to fund Ukraine over the next 2 years. One option, backed by the European Commission, is a loan secured by Russian state assets frozen at Euroclear in Brussels. We are now joined by our EU correspondent Angela Skujins from Brussels. Good morning, Angela. So what might we expect from this meeting, and how would this loan be backed by frozen Russian assets? How would that look like?
Good morning, Don. So yes, the expectations are quite low regarding this finance ministerial meeting here in the Belgian capital. We know that the reparations loan, that €140 billion loan to be provided to Ukraine, is high on the agenda. This is just one of three options outlined by European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen. She is spearheading the charge to make sure that Ukraine's financial needs over the next 2 years can be filled and supported by the EU. But the reason that the reparations loan is so contentious is that the cash proceeds that would be generated from this loan given to Ukraine come off those frozen Russian state assets currently held in Belgium. The Belgian Prime Minister, Bart de Wever, has maintained his antagonism against the pitch, arguing that it exposes Belgium to a lot of legal risk from Russia if Russia comes knocking. However, the European Commission President reiterated the need to support Ukraine as Russia continues attacking that country's energy infrastructure.
President Putin is again trying to terrorize the Ukrainian people to use winter as a weapon to freeze Ukraine into submission.
So you may be asking how this recent corruption scandal gripping Ukraine has impacted this financial affairs ministerial. We put this question to those ministers as they turned up to this meeting earlier this morning. The Danish Finance Minister Stephanie Lose said that she expects Ukraine to continue on that country's reform efforts. We also asked the Deputy Finance Minister from Lithuania, Kristupas Vaitiekūnas, whether this recent news has rattled the EU. He said maybe, but what other options does the EU have but to financially support Ukraine?
Yes, indeed. Angela Skujins reporting there from Brussels. Thank you for that report. We stand with Ukraine, said Germany's Finance Minister Lars Klingbeil, as he announced that Berlin will support the war-torn country with an additional €3 billion.
We have just come from budget consultations in Germany. In the finalization meeting, we will now allocate an additional €3 billion to strengthen Ukraine. This is important to us in Germany. We are Ukraine's biggest supporter in Europe, but we now need to find medium-term solutions for how we, as the European Union, can continue to actively support Ukraine as a whole. We are discussing what options are available. You are all aware of the discussion surrounding Russian assets, and we are now in the process of finding solutions. I am optimistic that we will succeed, but it is important that Europe also provide impetus in this area. No, we will not be intimidated by Russia. It is very clear that since the beginning of the war, attempts have been made to intimidate us. We have never allowed that to happen. We stand with Ukraine.
The UN acknowledges its outdated structure and calls for Security Council reform under the UN 80 process, citing lack of permanent representation for Africa and Latin America, and noting recent steps like requiring permanent members to justify vetoes. That's what former German foreign minister and current president of the UN General Assembly, Annalena Baerbock, told TVP World.
Clearly, the United Nations and especially the Security Council is not representing the world as it is today. It was built 80 years ago when the world had a total different phase. As you mentioned, Africa, for example, is not represented on the Security Council as a permanent member at all. But it will be the continent with most of the population. So this is totally unjust. Also, Latin America is not represented. So therefore, yes, we need a reform. We have this big reform process. It's called UN 80. And obviously, the reform of the Security Council should be part of it. We are working on it since years. And here the reform, it comes in tiny, tiny steps. One big step was the veto initiative that permanent members have to explain, for example, if there's a veto against a resolution regarding Ukraine and Russia has a veto, they have to explain themselves in the General Assembly.
Poland has every right to demand that Russian energy be phased out of Europe, says Szymon Kardash, Senior Policy Fellow at the European Council on Foreign Relations, speaking to World News Tonight here on TVP World.
We are very credible, in terms of advocating for it. And of course, due to the infrastructure that is on the ground and the infrastructure that is coming, and due to the interconnectors that were constructed, between Poland and Germany, Poland and Lithuania, Poland and Slovakia, we are in a quite good position also to offer the surplus, for instance, of natural gas that is coming to Poland to the neighboring countries and also to countries which are neighbors of our neighbors. So so Poland actually should present its strong voice on the European in the European Union and advocating for the implementation of sanctions and using sanctions as a good pretext to speed up the process of phasing out Russian energy companies and Russian energy from the European landscape.
Almost a dozen countries joined NATO's Dash and Fall military drills in Romania this Wednesday. Our Europe correspondent Alex Cadier took part in the exercises and has more on this impressive military display.
5,000 soldiers, 1,200 pieces of military equipment from 10 different nations, including France, Belgium, Romania, Bulgaria, Poland, and others. This is what the defense of NATO's eastern flank here in Romania may look like. Of course, this Dash and Fall 2025 is an exercise. This is training to make sure these militaries can work together, but it is becoming increasingly real with that looming Russian threat in the region, and with the withdrawal of some US troops positioned here in Romania announced in the last few weeks. You can see the Tiger attack helicopter from the French army behind me. It was part of this live fire exercise where they were attacking across a valley, clearly simulating what it might look like to defend these hills. Now, there was also a question of how quickly certain European militaries could get to the eastern flank, could get here to defend, be it Romania, Poland, or other Eastern European countries. That was a big question, one that I put to Maxime Dutroux, Bertrand, who's a French general in charge of getting the French forces here.
The thing that slowed us down was the deployment of our brigades. As we're in peacetime, our journey was slowed by administrative procedures because our military trains did not get priority to cross borders, so they waited 1 or 2 days. What we'd like is a kind of military Schengen, the capacity to deploy at all times in all European countries. It is a real need to put in place the defensive plans we have.
Now, officials here, be they Romanian or NATO officials, are very clear this is an exercise, this is training to repulse and reject any possible threat on the eastern flank. They do not name Russia directly, but a few things point to that threat. Of course, the amalgamation of European nations really taking center stage here, but also some of the equipment. You have the César artillery gun, you have the LRU, also both from the French military, which have been donated to Ukraine and are used in Ukraine. So you have military capabilities used in Ukraine being practiced here by European nations. Although they don't say it officially, this exercise is looking straight at the Russian threat in the region. In Romania, I'm Alex Cadye for TVP World.
The U.S. government is back open for business. With the stroke of a Sharpie, U.S. President Donald Trump signed a government funding bill into law, thus ending the 43-day-long shutdown, the longest in U.S. history. In the U.S., a government shutdown occurs when the annual appropriations bill that manages funding of the federal government is not passed before the beginning of the fiscal year. This results in major disruptions of government operations, including salary suspensions for federal employees. This year, the stalemate was eventually broken thanks to a compromise reached between the Republicans and 8 Democratic senators. Kazakhstan's President Kassym-Jomart Tokayev went to Moscow on Wednesday to pen a new energy deal with Russia. This comes after his trip to Washington last week, with critical minerals topping the meeting's agenda.
Kazakhstan's president is in demand, courted at the Kremlin on Wednesday after being welcomed at the White House last week. At stake is the country's vast mineral wealth, estimated at around 1 million tons of the elements seen as vital for the future economy, and Kazakhstan's place in the energy market. President Donald Trump called critical minerals a key priority as he hosted President Kassym-Jomart Tokayev and the leaders of 4 other Central Asian nations. And on Wednesday, President Tokayev was in Moscow inking a deal with President Putin for Russian oil supplies while providing him with coal.
We agreed to strengthen our partnership in the areas of oil products, coal and electricity production, transportation and supply. We discussed in detail the prospects for gas cooperation, in particular gas supply to Kazakhstan's regions bordering Russia, as well as transit to third countries.
The high-profile meetings come as Washington seeks to expand its influence in resource-rich Central Asia, long dominated by Russia and increasingly courted by China. Don't expect America's interest in Russia's backyard to go unnoticed.
Yesterday evening, several dozen people gathered at the Palais des Républiques in Paris to mark the eve of the 10th anniversary of the terror attack that killed 132 people and injured 350 more in the French capital. According to Paris Mayor Anne Hidalgo, who was present at the vigil, she will remember the night of November 13th, 2015 for the rest of her life. France marks 10 years since suffering its worst terrorist attack in history. On the night of November 13th, 2015, jihadists killed 130 people in shootings and suicide bombings in and around Paris, with the Islamic State claiming responsibility for the attacks. The terrorists killed some 90 people at the Bataclan concert hall, where the U.S. band Eagles of Death Metal was playing. The attackers ended the lives of dozens more at Parisian restaurants and cafes, as well as one person near the Stade de France stadium. which at the time was hosting a football match between France and Germany. The only surviving member of the 10-person terrorist cell that staged the attack is currently serving a lifetime sentence in jail after 9 of his fellow attackers blew themselves up or were killed by the police. And that concludes this edition of World News. We'll be back with another World News update at the top of the hour, so hope to see you then.